A very good morning to you, and thank you so much for joining us for this morning's discussion. My name is Sia Sangweni, brand manager of cliffcentral.com, and this morning I have the pleasure of being your moderator. So welcome to the next event in the Future of Media Digitized series. This morning we're taking a look at three particular topics: platforms, integration, and future consumption. If you're new to the series, well, firstly, where have you been? But secondly, without judging you too much, I will bring you up to speed in a little while. But I do have to apologize on our behalf. You've got to love some technical issues. We have some gremlins in our system, so I'm not just the voice of God that you're hearing. I know you're probably facing a blank screen right now, but in the next couple of moments, you'll be able to see us as well. Our technical team is on that, but we do appreciate you being patient with us and also just being very keen to get the conversation started. So as I mentioned a little earlier, this series is all about focusing on these unprecedented times that we find ourselves in today and the demand that brands and marketers are facing these challenges head on and being armed with the right information and tools to adapt and thrive in the future. So understanding that, one quickly realizes that the future of media depends on you and I, hence the series. So with so much at stake for our economy and the investments required to sustain it, it's imperative for brand and marketing managers, media planners, media buyers, media owners, and advertisers to know exactly how the media landscape is unfolding and to be, as one would say, fighting fit to weather the storms of disruption. And on top of all of that, to be fueled with the latest industry intelligence, so to speak, strategies for the coming 12 to 18 months can become more resilient and relevant. So this is the genesis of this series. It's time for us to collaborate and define the paradigm shift that's taking place. So the Future of Media Digitized series is a platform for expert knowledge sharing and a view into the fast-paced changes that are currently happening in an increasingly fragmented South African and, not forgetting, global media and economic landscape. And this morning will be no different. With today's theme, it's clear that no longer are radio, television, print, or out-of-home advertising discrete advertising opportunities. They've become bound in a web that's held together by the silk thread of digital technology. And herein lies both a challenge and a huge opportunity for brands who know how to make sense of the muddle and organize the threads, linking the platforms together, knowing which to detangle or choose to unbundle completely. But how do advertisers and media planners and agencies get multi-channel marketing right? Well, this is what I'll be discussing with my panel this morning. But first, a big shout out to Vodacom, Easy Ads, Everlytic, Proudly SA, The Media Shop, and WAN Earthra for making this event possible. Thank you very much to our sponsors and partners. We wouldn't be able to do this without you. But this morning will largely be a panel discussion, but we also want to hear from you as well, wherever you're watching, whether you're at the office or at home. Message us with your comments or questions during the conversation, and I'll be able to ask our panels whatever's on your mind. And you can add your question to the live chat on the right-hand side of your screen. That's where it should be. And also, look, I'll even say it, as if that wasn't exciting enough. And if you're looking for extra excitement, we're also running a competition this morning. If you're watching this, you can stand the chance to win 50,000 rands worth of advertising with Vodacom and the Future of Media. Talk about quite a timely prize to win. So at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see a win 50,000 rands of advertising button, right? So click on that over the course of the conversation and it will take you to a page where you simply just have to fill in your details and you can be in the running to win 50,000 rands worth of advertising. So thank you to Vodacom and the Future of Media for making that happen. But let's not waste any more time. Let's get into the conversation for this morning. I'd like to introduce my panel. So starting us off, Managing Director of United Stations, Rivek Bunce. Good morning, Rivek. How are you?
Morning, Sia. I'm well, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. Rivek, in your words, you're an unapologetic radio fanatic who wormed his way into the wondrous world of radio back in 1987. And today, you still remain focused on placing radio at the forefront of where media is going and ensuring that radio is best positioned to continue delivering innovative marketing solutions to advertisers. And then we have Managing Director at Everlytic, JD Engelbrecht. Good morning, JD. How are you?
Doing well, Sia. Thanks. It's lovely being here and looking forward to, as I mentioned earlier, to the panel in the background. Let's try and be profound.
Oh, oof. No pressure there.
No pressure.
Very strong words from JD. JD is a commercial technologist who's passionate about finding creative solutions to problems. His experience in digital product development and commercialization has allowed him to work with various South African market leaders in media, in e-commerce, in advertising, and data science and agriculture. Then we have Livia Brown, aka Liv, because she's now said in the past couple of minutes, we're close enough to be besties and on a nickname basis. Liv Brown is the general manager for Posterscope South Africa. Liv, how are you doing?
I'm great, thanks, and you, Sia? Yeah, also really looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome stuff. You have been crafting your expertise at Posterscope since April of 2013, and you've shown incredible growth over the past couple of years. And prior to your time at Posterscope, you gained work experience in the retail and sales industries, and you've worked at companies such as Peninsula Beverages and Ferrero Rocher as well. We also have Merlin Nike, Group Executive for Television at the SABC, joining us. Hi, Merlin. How are you?
Morning, Sia. I'm good, thanks. And yourself?
Fantastic. Thanks for asking. Merlin brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to the SABC, and he holds various qualifications, including, I feel like I need a grand drum roll for this, an MBA, a BSc Honours in Digital Technology, Design and Innovation from the Dublin Institute of Technology, a postgraduate certificate in Project Management, a higher diploma in Business Management, and the list goes on. I really do mean that. We also have Michelle Randall, Sales Director at Christopher Africa. Hi, Michelle. How are you?
Hi, Sia. Hi, everyone. I'm really looking forward to some great discussions that we're going to have in the next hour and a half. Really
Awesome. Looking forward to it as well. Now, Christopher Africa is a South African-owned artificial intelligence software that enables brands to engage in relevant consumer conversations in real time on social media to drive relevant reach and resonant engagement and awareness. And this is achieved through sophisticated data profiling and hyper-personalized responses to organic conversations taking place on social media. Very fascinating work that you're doing there. And then we have Isla Prentice. Good morning, Isla.
Morning, Sia, and morning, everybody who's tuned in. Looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome stuff. So intelligence lead at Terasana Consulting, that's within the media shop. You have valuable experience from the likes of Unilever and Samsung and Tiger brands, but you're now excited for your latest challenge of shaping Terasana, the human intelligence consultancy at the media shop. And you have a focus on rocking the status quo of the industry in order to bring about real change. So looking forward to your insight as well. And last but certainly not least, Head of Advertising Sales at Arena Holdings. Good morning, Eben Gevers.
Good morning, Sia. How are you doing today?
I'm fantastic, thank you. How are you?
Excellent, man. Looking forward to taking up JD's challenge of being as profound as possible and hopefully bringing some more insight into the future of media.
From my experience of interacting with you at Arena Holdings and the array of projects that you overlook underneath advertising sales, I'm very excited to especially hear from you. You are a couple of days actually away from Sunday Times Gen Next for 2020. How are you feeling?
No, it's fantastic. I mean, it's actually quite an interesting time in our lives. You know, Gen Next for us is always a fantastic project where for the last 16 years, we've kind of polled what young people are thinking out there about brands, about how brands communicate to them, etc. But sneakily, I must admit that a big part of the project for me is the actual function. So for those who don't know, in the past, we would gather about 600 to 900 people, young people in a room, and have a bit of fun with them. And it was always a huge amount of fun because I would get up on stage and people would shout if I just cleared my throat. Sadly, this year, that's not going to happen, but the results are still coming out fairly soon. And we're hoping that marketers still find value in that.
Absolutely. So that's taking place in a couple of days' time. We might share that information as well a little later on. But thank you all so much for being here this morning. No pressure, but there was just actually so much demand from people wanting to hear from all of you, from your various perspectives, that there's so much information to cover. We decided to make the event 1 hour, 30 minutes. So looking forward to engaging in that over the next little while. So without wasting any more time, I want to get straight into the conversation and start with you, Liv. COVID-19 arrived, and really, I feel like no one could have expected the state that we're in right now. Advertising was hit quite hard with people being in lockdown. How do you believe advertising has relearned and transformed how the medium is perceived, seen, and bought?
Yeah, so yeah, you're 100% right. I think that none of us could have seen this coming, but what's been amazing for me is some of the benefits, if I dare say it, of COVID, especially from an out-of-home perspective. So what we've seen is that the industry has actually shaken itself off, stood up, and has made a lot of changes, which has been really great. So we're seeing a lot of flexibility around contracts, around rates, and we're seeing some great out-of-home inventory becoming available for the first time that might have been in long-term holdings. And we're also seeing changes from mobile being incorporated with data more, which brings the online and the offline worlds together. We've seen measurement in out-of-home really stepping up and taking its seat at the table. So amongst the huge disruption, there's definitely been a lot of change that has been really positive for the industry. And we look forward to seeing those threads running through going forward. So the disruption has been really good for the industry in some instances.
Isla, one could argue that many elements of human behavior are going to change permanently because of the times that we're living in. Have people's spending and consumption patterns through this COVID-19 pandemic made it hard to determine the future of how brands should advertise and what platform to use?
I think my answer to that is yes and no. I think for me, 2020 has been a year of teaching us a lesson that we cannot predict the future. You know, every year we set out to write trends, to tell everybody what's in store. We look to write annual strategies for clients, and we have a look what's happening. And I think 2020 for me has just been that year to say, actually, you have no idea what you're talking about. You cannot predict the future. And with that, it's just, you know, they say it takes 21 days to form a new habit. We're sitting on the 5-month mark of this. A lot of new habits have formed. But for me, it's not so much about that. It's not so much about what people are doing, but it's more about how do we that it's new behavior. It's more that it's a reminder that we don't know what everybody's doing. Everybody is unique and different. So it's how do we reach that scale and get that mass across everything? How do we find those commonalities to really be able to connect to people, to understand how behavior is changing and how behavior is impacting brands?
Right. You know, JD, what is mentioned about that authenticity and personalization, well, that's what I got from the answer. From your perspective, the consumer is now able to interact with a brand more than ever before. But is that enough? How are you taking a step further to give them an experience they'll want to invest in?
Sure, that's a tough question. I think the first step is to really know your customer and know what they need. And once you have that, you need to understand the relationship between what their wants and needs are and your own business goals, and determine what will move them. And this you will get from a combination of qualitative analysis and quantitative data analytics. And then once you kind of have an idea of what will move them, you need to determine when they will be receptive. And then and this is the easy bit, you just put the right message in front of them at the right time, using the right channel, and you leverage the most engaging channels and content options, and taking note of the fact that these options may be different for different use cases, different people, and different segments. And then the final step is to just use automation to follow it up with the next best message based on their data context and the position in the conversion funnel.
You know, Michelle, JD almost makes it sound so and too simple. do you believe that technology or digital advertising companies have had a head start compared with other players in the industry by already dabbling in the tech space and using these various platforms to interact with their audiences?
Yeah, to a degree, I think, digital by nature and having access to data and data points, being able to be more agile, react and respond, and with quicker turnarounds has really put digital at the forefront of where we are now. I think maybe the challenges on a local front and for maybe media owners that aren't the natural three, the Facebook, Twitter, and Google, has been how do we ensure that brands know that by going with alternative platforms, we can drive not just reach at scale, but more effective reach. So where we can connect in more meaningful ways, where we can drive more relevant messaging to people at scale through personalization. So I think, the challenge is obviously fighting against the big three, but maybe more an opportunity now more than ever with diminishing budgets, communicating the advantage of being with platforms and digital partners that can give more effective reach with more relevant messaging and break through that clutter in terms of driving attention. I think really what we're trying to achieve as media specialists is reach a lot of people, but in meaningful ways or in environments where they've got a higher propensity to pay attention to the messaging. So using that data and insights will absolutely amplify that.
Right. Speaking of that data and insights that some might have on their hands, Merlin, viewers are now more selective about what content they spend their time and money watching, and most importantly, on what platform as well. How has in-home media been affected by the pandemic, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's quite an interesting one in terms of our experience at the SABC. We found that TV consumption has remained quite high. In fact, the SABC recorded its highest audiences during lockdown. An episode of Uzalo reached over 11 million viewers during lockdown. But we are cognizant that this trend is based on consumers being forced to stay at home and appointment viewing patterns where the viewer is accustomed to getting new episodes on a specific day and time. So outside of this prime time, the story is more telling as consumers start to seek content driven by their needs. So what we find is they're either interested in a movie or a sitcom at that point in time. So on demand then takes to the fore. So it's quite interesting to watch that in prime time. We see the shift go back to TV audiences, and off prime, the likes of YouTube, Netflix, Showmax, all taking a lot of the audiences there. I think it will start to settle as we now enter level 2 and more businesses come in. And I think a lot of the media owners will now have to pick up the pieces and try and re-attract their audiences going forward again.
And Rivek, it's quite a big and loaded question to ask you for your first question, but in your opinion, what is the future of radio? Could it possibly be podcasts? I mean, essentially right now we're broadcasting in the dark. I think it's safe to say we're recording our own little podcast here.
I think this is a very much a podcast so far.
Yeah.
But I think this is probably the most exciting time to be in radio. There's so much that's conspiring in our favor. I mean, that for decades now, radio has managed to keep a pace with changes as they come along. But a lot of the changes that are happening, and I suppose, there's a big focus on digital today, a lot of those conspire in radio's favor and make sure that radio thrives. So basically you have a situation, and podcasting is not the only one of those options, but right now, radio is finding ways to use all this new technology to actually spread its influence and grow other additional audiences in different spaces.
Right. And, on that note, I think print is also in a similar vein, a traditional model, but that still packs a lot of power. So, Eben, everyone said print would die, and yet we're in 2020. Print is still an attractive offer for brands. What makes print so attractive still?
Man, I think ultimately, it's an old saying of video killed the radio star, right? It's kind of at what point are you going to say, okay, enough now, that's it. I think print is enduring for a variety of reasons, but I think in this post-truth world, if you want to call it that, print is still got a lot of gravitas, no discussion about it, and it's still kind of perceived as print has this, it has a lot of truth behind it. There's no fake news sources for a very long period of time. Still, obviously, there's natural declines, just like in most media platforms. They are natural declines, but I really think that in this environment, it's actually quite interesting to see how well print's doing, simply because people want verifiable, trusted, good news sources behind the information that they consume.
So just going back then to that engagement between a brand and its audience a little more, Isla, could you chat around some of the benefits of multi-channel marketing?
I think this comes back to, and this isn't anything that's new. A lot of people seem to think that multi-channel is this new conversation that we started having. But, I remember sitting back in varsity and being drilled with really just focusing on, why are you using a platform? Why are you using a media type? What is its role? And every media type actually has its own role. And it's our job to make sure that brands are using a media type for its benefits, not its negatives, which happens a lot still. So when you're using the benefits, it's about making sure that the messaging actually brings that to life. So I'm scared to become biased to any media channel, but if I think, Vivac speaks about radio. We know that radio is an intimate media type. People see the radio as their friend. From a television point of view, we know that it's really good at building reach really quickly and effectively from an audiovisual nature point of view. From a print point of view, Ibn's already spoken about the credibility of it. From a digital point of view, the mass personalization, so be able to reach people at scale, but have individual conversations and messaging at scale allows. And these are just like the tip of the iceberg. So it really is about understanding what you're using the media type for. And if you just pick one lane, you only get to tap into those benefits. So by picking to go into all the lanes, and by picking to go into different media types, working with creative agencies, with brand agencies, with activation agencies, with everybody to understand what role each one is playing, it all gets to come to life, and we get to build the best possible brand experience that the consumer can be a part of.
Right. JD, on the note of that brand experience, how do you, in your industry, create and keep loyalty between customers and a brand?
So in the context of direct marketing, so that's what Everlytic does, email, SMS primarily, and push notifications and everything you can imagine in terms of direct communications. Email has been around for ages, and it will continue to be there for ages. It's something that is just so persistent and pervasive. And I've worked at a number of businesses where running analytics departments, where I can tell you that email drives loyalty, engagement, and retention. It contributes significantly to assisted conversions, because then tomorrow's marketer understands that attribution happens across different channels. The one helps the other. Is a compounding effect in the aggregate that delivers conversions. But in the general context of what creates loyalty, I think it is about understanding what your customer wants and what would actually solicit their loyalty, because aimlessly giving doesn't necessarily build loyalty. And then you have to also balance this, the books, what your business can give, and generally loyalty comes in the form of some monetary, some commercial benefit to the consumer. Doesn't have to, but as business leaders, we need to understand what we can give and what will actually move the needle to create that loyalty. And it comes down to very simple principles. Like being respectful, being relevant, and that also again starts with knowing your customer, and then being useful and unique, solving something for them in their lives that makes them come back to you, and then being consistent in the experiences that you provide them, and making sure that when they consider your brand, they know what it stands for and they know what they're getting.
Yeah. So Michelle, let's discuss what real-time engagement is and why is it so important to the customer experience?
Sia, I think it's, there's various ways in which we can engage in real time, whether it's via community management or a bot or through AI. And I think for the purpose of this discussion, it's really important to understand the difference between what a bot does and what an artificial intelligence does, and why they have various benefits. So just for a brief explanation, a bot works in a way that there are predefined conversations and ways to answer them. So if someone says this, I respond that. If someone says this, I respond that. Where AI comes into play is that it's based on real learning. So the machine actually starts learning. And this is really important because now I can pick up on cues and what my audience is talking about, understand and identify who they are, where they are, what is the tone of their conversation, what is the sentiment of what they're saying, what is their gender, what is their age, and how do I respond appropriately? Because I think we can agree that we're not fools as consumers, and we can see right through the fact that someone is responding robotically, or if someone is responding and engaging with me in a meaningful way. So I think that's really where the power comes in of real-time engagement in a relevant way to drive those real meaningful connections using these data points and understanding.
Yeah, Merlin, how's the SABC incorporating just what Michelle was talking about? So what are, for you, the benefits of incorporating television into multi-channel approach, and how do you advise the audience creates a successful multi-channel marketing strategy?
So television is still a trusted medium because it still plays a focal point for the larger brands in the marketplace. It still allows brands to achieve the reach that is required across a different variety of target demographics. In terms of the execution and how you would develop a successful multi-channel strategy, I think definitely paying homage to television. It's a visual medium. So the campaign has to be engaging. It's got to have exciting executions. And these concepts become, the talking points around the water cooler the following day. So we think of some of the really good ads. I think Nike's got a fantastic ad out right now where they shoot two different images and they combine them in one screen that everybody is talking about in terms of how the world has progressed and just latching onto the Black Lives Matter campaign. So in terms of introducing television or using television, it's about engaging, exciting executions, and then extending that simply to online, which is quite easily done. So it's snippets of the same execution done online as a teaser campaign. So it becomes seamless and integrated in terms of the execution.
Got it. And Rivek, in your opinion, is what Merlin is talking about similar then in radio? What value, in your opinion, can advertisers get from radio specifically?
Well, I think the big thing here is that radio has really jumped on and turned all of this technology, everything that we've spoken of so far, has turned it to its own benefit. And for some time now, broadcasters and presenters have been building very strong social media followings, incorporating SMS, etc., into what they're doing on air, and utilizing all these strengths. I think Merlin spoke about trust and credibility. I think that's a big thing with radio. Obviously, radio is depended upon to bring some trust into these situations. While digital is very narrow and focused, radio manages to cast a much wider net. We also play different roles, like, for example, piquing interest. Radio is very, very good at direct response, getting a reaction from an audience. Perhaps not so good at all the detail, but that can obviously be passed on as a function to other media.
Right. Liv, back to you now. What are the methods for measuring audiences for out-of-home advertising that you particularly use?
Yeah, so out of home has traditionally been a very unmeasured medium. And I think that's had quite a few challenges around proving ROI the same way that some of the other channels perform. But what we've definitely seen during lockdown is a growth in measurement, and it's something we're definitely going to see going forward. And there's been a lot of different ways media owners and agencies have looked at how do we measure traffic. Essentially, we understand during lockdown, cars left the roads and people were staying at home. So how do you prove the traffic is back on the roads and that out of home is still a suitable medium for an investment? So we're seeing a lot of media owners joining the OMC. So there are over 22 media owners on the system currently. And what's great about the OMC, for those who are not familiar with the technology, is they use a combination of satellite technology to understand which cars are traveling past which billboards from a certain cone of vision, as well as doing a travel survey to understand who are the people that are in that area. And the data is very rich. It enables us to form a currency for out of home, as well as understand reach and frequency per site. So the more media owners that are joining that platform, it means that we are speaking the same language across different media owners, whereas at the moment there's quite a mixed bag of measurements, some of it very accurate, some of it very inaccurate. So growth of media partners coming onto the OMC has been fantastic. And then we've seen a few other methods of measurement popping up. So there's a company called Lightstone, and I know that there's also a TomTom product that's coming to market around using trackers in cars to understand how many cars are actually physically driving past billboards. I've engaged with some suppliers who are bringing radar technology to the country to fit a radar to a billboard to count the cars. And I think that what we're looking for from a measurement perspective is how many people and who are they. And that really opens up a lot of possibility. When we start to unpack programmatic out of home, if there's a measurement factor to it, it brings that to life. And one of the other measurement factors we're seeing is mobile data being used. So this brilliant pairing of mobile and out of home together means the online and the offline worlds are coming closer together, but we're also able to say how many mobile signals are there around a certain billboard and what profile or information can we get from that audience so that we can deliver them more targeted messaging to be more relevant.
Awesome. Just going to some viewer questions now. Marco would like to know, how do you feel that South Africa handles paid versus organic marketing? Anyone in particular want to answer that? Don't jump up at once. Michelle, could you answer that?
Sure. I mean, I'm not a specialist in actual social.
Yeah.
If we go back to understanding what our job is as a marketer or as a brand, is we need to drive significant reach and conversation amongst a lot of our category consumers. And we understand the algorithm on social media is that if we're just doing organic, we're not reaching enough people. And in order to move that needle and for our brands to grow and for us to, even maybe not grow, but sustain during this time, we need to lots of people. We need to be driving reach. And I don't think that we can rely solely on organic conversations or organic posts to do the job on behalf of brands. So I don't have the insight of what the split is between organic and paid. But in my opinion, in terms of if I look at what job needs to be done, I definitely think that paid for media and paid for social.
So I'll take a stab at it.
Yeah, JD.
Because it's a difficult question because, in general, marketers are storytellers, and the content and the messaging is distributed through all these different channels. And we can stitch it all together through a data layer at the back of it. But ultimately, a conflict that exists is that the platforms, let's talk about Google and Facebook, the distribution platforms, and the discovery platforms that allows your content, your messages, your stories to be discovered are also the platforms that you pay money to distribute your content on. So in the beginning with Facebook, everyone was driving likes on the ambition that you would build your audience and you would own your audience. And then incrementally, it was ratcheted down where it becomes you have to pay to play. And it's the same thing as the search engine algorithms change over time, and it is an interesting conflict, but ultimately create good stories, package it appropriately for the different channels, and then use whatever distribution you can to get those stories out and link the stories together using just a little bit of intelligence in the back of it all to stitch its story together, drive frequency across channels, understanding the customer's life cycle through a day, the mediums they consume at which times, and then tell your stories and distribute them accordingly. But that conflict is a pain. I know many marketers have spent millions upon millions in building audiences that they now can't access without paying for them again.
Yeah. Just another reminder to you watching, we are running a competition this morning. So if you're watching this, you can stand a chance to win 50,000 Rands worth of advertising with Vodacom and the future of media. At the bottom of your screen, you should see a win 50,000 Rands of advertising. You can click on that, fill in your details, and then you'll be in the running. Just to go back to some listener questions, some viewer questions again. From Justin, he'd like to ask Isla, how are we going to focus on providing what clients need when we are only scratching the surface of what consumers need?
I think that's a great question. And I think that's really, I'll start off with a quote, and really we should be focusing on what consumers need, and that's, if we get that right, that's giving us what clients need. So if the two are ever separated out, there's a problem in the process, and that's where we need to have the real hard conversations to make sure that client needs are consumer needs, because clients can't grow without consumers. And I think just with that, I'm going to focus a little bit on the consumer. There's a great quote. It's an anonymous quote that says, "There's many people who know me, but not many people who understand me." And I think the reason I love that quote so much is, in our industry, we focus so much on knowledge, whether it be through big data or whether it be through any form of theory, any form of data. And it really is, that is important, but it's not enough to stop there, because that's not going to help you to understand those consumer needs. We really need to start taking it to the next step, to that next level of, how do I actually understand all of those elements, understand the data, but as well as the human side, human behavior. So whether it's the scientific side of how the human mind works, or the cultural side of it, to understand that different cultures have different impacts on identity, different layers of your identity impact your consumer needs. So really just focusing, how do we merge those two together? And at the forefront of everything that we do, the one thing that every stakeholder in our industry should have, it should be first about not even just consumers, but about human beings.
Isla, thanks for that. It's anonymous no more. Thank you very much for crediting one of my quotes. Profound, I say, even if I say so myself. Moving on. I think I'll throw this question to Ryvek and Merlin. Bonnie would like to know, how is TV and radio utilizing AI when it comes to brand reach? Have they even started using such?
I'm not aware of us using it in radio, but obviously we can work very closely with AI in the field. I mean, I can't see that when putting a campaign together, there's no harm in looking to partner with other suppliers who can do this type of thing. I think it's more that we are sort of an integral part of the marketing mix. But yes, it's something that we could explore as radio ourselves.
Merlin, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I think television, if we look at television as a mechanism, we look at it very traditionally, but when you start to realize that video content is consumed across a number of different platforms, and the need for information then becomes extremely important. If I take SABC specifically, we've got to target the right across the board. We do in terms of language, in terms of genres, that kind of stuff. And intelligence becomes really important to us to understand, where are these consumers, what are they watching, and if they're not watching us, where are their needs serviced in terms of platforms, in terms of content. So it's becoming more sort of instantaneous, and artificial intelligence is becoming a requirement. The standard people meter data is no longer relevant, or not relevant, but it's no longer satisfying the need because it comes, a day or two after the fact. Whereas if you look at the likes of the online platforms, they're getting it in real time, absolute real time. They're almost predicting where the consumer is going to next and reaching them there, and then, keeping them enticed. So artificial intelligence and that kind of analytics, big data, is going to become a significant role player going forward, so that you can keep pace with your audiences.
Right. Eben, back to you now. Across the board, the pandemic has led to this immediate drop in advertising spending. Has this made local media organizations rethink their traditional business models? And while you're answering that, how would you advise advertisers adapt their spending in these times?
Sure. So I'm going to say something now that JD might consider a little bit profound, hopefully. But if you think about it, advertising revenue has, quite frankly, slowly declined anyway. Over the last couple of years, the pie has really, it started slowing down, but within that, there's been a huge amount more competitors, both in the digital space, et cetera, et cetera. So the pie has actually shrunk quite a bit, but then all of a sudden, and we knew that there was a steady decline in ad revenue anyway, but all of a sudden it fell off a cliff, for a short period of time. And we are starting to see recoveries, which is fantastic for everybody on this panel, but we are starting to see recoveries in terms of the revenues, which is good. But it has made all of us think a lot more carefully about what we actually offer to the advertiser. So I know a lot of the discussion today has been about the platform, which is fantastic because that's what we do for a living. But at the bottom end of the platform, or the ultimate role of what we do for a living, is to reach an audience. And I think a lot of us have started thinking a lot more carefully about how do we actually marry that audience with a client? What can I do as a media owner to actually put the two in touch? And I think a lot of us have started thinking about that. So at Arena, for example, a specific thing that we've really been working on the cards anyway, but it's gone into overdrive now, is to actually ramp up that loyalty of that audience that we have. We've got this amazing audience that trust us, that trust what we say, both on our print platforms, digital platforms, television platforms, etc. And the idea is to actually just take all of that and put it in front of a client and say, here is another opportunity for you, not just in traditional advertising, but other means to actually access that audience. And then to the second part of your question, in terms of the advice that we would give, I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to consistency, right? So, I mean, it sounds a little bit selfish as a media owner to say, don't stop advertising. But at the end of the day, that's exactly what you can't afford to do. You can't afford to just stop communicating and go away because there's the thing out there. What you need to do is just subtly change your message, or profoundly change your message, but also just to have a look at what you are trying to achieve. Your KPIs might have shifted slightly, etc. But don't just go away. I find it absolutely incredible that people would actually just pull the plug and go away. And what I mean by that is if you look at various categories. So, for example, on retail, we see consistency there, which is fantastic because people still need to go to the shops, or they need to order from one of the various delivery options to get the product. But then we see, for example, on the travel side, that people have actually just pulled the plug. And I get it because the airlines aren't flying, the cruise ships aren't going out, etc. But right now is a fantastic opportunity to say this audience that's at home, that's stuck there, is dreaming about this fantastic holiday. So I'm not just saying throw millions of rands at it, but actually just get me to think about, when the world opens up, what are the top 3 destinations that I'm going to take my family to? Where can I go for 10,000 rand? Where can I go in Gauteng that's less than an hour away to take my family and is dog friendly? So what I'm saying is don't stop, just change the message slightly. And we're not saying throw buckets of money at it, because quite frankly, most of our advertisers, they're reliant on revenue and they're not getting the revenue, so they don't have it. But don't just pull the plug. Actually, just be consistent in your communication or the pace of your communication, but just change the message slightly.
That is such a good point. That really is. Livia, how has changing consumer behavior pushed traditional out-of-home advertising to collaborate with other mediums?
Yeah, what we've definitely seen is this bridge, and I've touched on it already, but the bridge between online and offline activity. I think, consumers want a seamless experience. If you're at home watching your TV, you want a seamless experience onto your device. And I think that it's to ask ourselves, how do we bring that type of experience to an out-of-home, if it's a digital site or traditional billboard, how do we ensure that we're still being relevant and bridging that gap between devices, between different media types? And I think that thread that runs through is almost how we can use digital out-of-home as a format to create more relevance. You can have contextual messaging. You can change your messaging as you go. And there's a lot of different dynamic creative messaging platforms that we can have a look at. So the bridge really comes between having seamless messaging between the different formats and an understanding what consumers are looking for when out of home and what are they looking for when they're on other channels.
Got it. And moving on to Isla, there's a question from Piliso, and Piliso would like to know, what about media or platform metrics that are used to indicate the success of a campaign? How effective are benchmarks to know that a campaign will be a success?
Benchmarks are good to understand that you can compare yourself to, but a benchmark doesn't necessarily mean that your campaign will be a success. There are so many variables within any campaign. The most variable is the creative at the end of the day, something that none of us really have control over. And there's so many triggers that you can't say just because other campaigns like it are a success, that your campaign is a success. But that being said, it's the same as when clients ask us, I want to be big and bold and innovative and I want to take a risk, but can you prove to me that it's worked? Big risk can equal big reward. Small risk can equal small reward. So it is about understanding, what are you trying to do? What's really important with KPIs more than benchmarks is making sure that everybody, every player in the game is on the same page and going after the same goal. You've got to go after the same win. You can't have one person, trying to get a 1-0 win and somebody else wanting to go beat the world record. So we really got to make sure that we have those conversations up front. Benchmarks allow us to make sure we're pushing ourselves hard enough, but don't be restricted by benchmarks either. So it is about making sure you have open conversations up front, aligning everybody to make sure that you're going after the same goal, and then using those benchmarks to know that you're pushing yourself hard enough.
Right. JD, I think then that also ties into what actually makes an effective campaign. I think there's no point in having great content, but an ineffective campaign. What would your advice be to someone when it comes to delivering an effective campaign?
I think the first thing that we kind of skip over sometimes as executives and marketers is that we don't always consider exactly what we want the customer to do. So step one is make damn sure that you understand what your outcomes are, and see how you can marry your outcomes with what the user wants and needs. So understand what the user jobs are at the different stages of their communication lifecycle with you. But once you know what the customers want and what you want them to do, it's important to get your data ready. And just as you guys are giving away 50,000 Rand today, I think we can also start a drinking game. Every time I say data, someone has to do a shot. Because it is all about the data.
This is what I feared, JD. This is what I feared when the president lifted the ban of alcohol. This is what would happen.
Exactly. So very creative way to get you guys into it. So it's all about getting your data ready, understanding your customers at a very granular level, and you can combine the contextual data. In other words, did someone leave something in their online basket? You can look at the psychographic data and you can look at the transactional data to create a very rich picture of your customer, and then segment your base into into similar groups to not make it too granular, to make it expensive to execute and complicated to measure, but to find groups that have things in common to whom you can target a specific message. And then based on those segments, you need to choose the right channels for those people at the right time and create relevant messaging with very clear calls to action. So know what you want the customer to do and ask them to do it. We often are very subtle in the way we do it, but why not be a little bit bold and be clear in what your expectations are. And then with platforms like Evalytic, you can set up automated journeys to nurture and manage frequency across different channels and to create continuity and coherence across the different messages and mediums. And then connect your data behind the channels to create the cross-channel, let's call it coherence again, and then execute, monitor, adjust, and iterate. But use the tools that are available to you. Leverage the technology to be an extension of your marketing team, so that you can have a marketing program that is driven off of data, that is powered by 24/7 automation, that prints money for you at the back.
Wow. Michelle, this question is from Noah, and Noah would like to know, there's a lot going on with this one, but what impact has cancel culture and fake news and the transition to cookieless environment had on digital media?
Sure, I think, for us, it's actually benefited us on the AI side of things, because we don't rely on cookies, we rely on actual real-time conversations and being able to engage with them. And I think the reason why people moved away from cookies was because it became a little bit disruptive and annoying for consumers. And if we put the consumer back at the center of our brand communications and what they want, we need to be cognizant of where we are talking to them. And when you're being followed around, obviously based on cookies, it can be really irritating. So I think it's made us, or it's forced us as marketers and as brands to relook how we communicate, obviously very important, but also where we communicate that is convenient for the brand, or for the consumer to resonate with what I'm saying. I think we can agree that across the media mix, we've got massive opportunities to really engage and connect with consumers, whether it's through storytelling on TV, whether it's being friend and credible on radio, whether it's credible news on newspapers, and then tying it all together in digital platforms where it's more relevant and not just this push annoying cookie-based application. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Cool. For you, Merlin, has online streaming services impacted TV sales? And if so, how?
Yeah, definitely. We've seen, as noticed through let's go before lockdown. We saw a lot of ads spend shifting to digital platforms, obviously chasing the consumer. Lockdown came in and we saw that gap widening. So it increased from, probably 5-10% up to about 20% of advertising now moving that way. It's an interesting phenomenon because we as a broadcaster also have our content on those platforms. So it's something we embrace, but it also needs to happen in a controlled manner. You don't want to suddenly lose all of your consumers on your traditional platform and not be on these new platforms. So it's something that we're observing, obviously, taking into context that the pandemic has fast-tracked a lot of behaviors because of people being on at home. But I think in the next couple of weeks we'll start to see a sense of normality, and I can assure you that a lot of broadcasters are revising their strategies. We're going to see a lot more people go online and ensure that their content is there as well.
Right. Rivik, how do you see radio fitting into the multi-channel approach, and why is it so important to include? And does this mean as well that there's a dramatic move away from traditional radio towards a more multi-platform environment?
Definitely not a massive shift away from radio into other environments. I think radio, as we know, we can see with the numbers and with the time spent listening, has managed to retain its audience. But you must understand that all these other platforms have now been incorporated into the whole radio ecosystem. So what we are finding is that we've got much more opportunity to build our audiences in all these different places. When I think the lockdown is obviously interesting to every one of us, and anyone who's perhaps a sales manager at a media platform is concerned to how they're performing vis-a-vis everybody else. One thing that I think, which is quite an endorsement for radio, is that radio is held up incredibly well since lockdown. I mean, obviously we are way down year on year like everybody, but proportionately we're getting much more of the media spend out there. I think one case is obviously people coming back to something they really trust at a time when they're very unnerved by what's going on and uncertain. People go back to something they trust, and I think fortunately radio definitely holds that reputation. But we've also seen a lot of new advertisers coming in. And yes, that conversation is very much, they are interested in a multi-platform approach. They're very interested in our presenters as influencers. They're very interested in the communities that our shows and our presenters have built up around. So they are also incredibly aware of that ecosystem, and they obviously want to leverage it. But I think also that one of the main reasons they're coming in is that people remember that radio can cast a very wide net. So I think Merlin mentioned that he noticed a strong move quickly into online and digital. People try to find their audiences. I think it's not long and then people realize that you also need to cast a wide net, and radio is able to cast that wide net and target at the same time. People are very obviously keeping a close tab on the type of ROI they're getting, type of results they're getting. And fortunately, we've been able to give very positive and powerful results over this time. And I think, again, because our audiences across the board are also up. And we're touching those audiences right through the day. It's been a very interesting time for radio. If you talk to radio programmers and who are monitoring what's happening to their audiences across the day, obviously we don't have these big peak drive times as they were before, although they're starting to come back now. But now we have this large audience right across the day and right across the week, which is incredibly interesting.
Right. Michelle, a lot of people, we have to be honest, are afraid of AI and its abilities. They have all of this hesitation. How do you see AI changing the media landscape? And especially after a documentary like The Great Hack a little while ago, there was this controversy around data profiling.
So Sia, I think it's no surprise that AI is changing the way of the world as we know it. I think it's really an exciting time for marketers and for brands in particular, because for decades, JD mentioned it earlier, but we talk about data and data insights, but it's how do we action against that in real time? And this is really where AI can play a pivotal role in a media strategy. But, I think people refer to AI as the industrial revolution. And I think perhaps across other industries, it can be termed that. In media, I'm of the belief that AI is more an evolution of media. It's how we're using what we know already works and just amplifying that. How do we be that silk thread that you mentioned earlier to connect the various media platforms, to talk to our consumers in relevant ways? I think digital and social media exploded the way it did a decade ago, because as marketers and brands, we understood we had to reach a lot of our audience, huge category reach, but digital gave us the opportunity to now segment that audience and target maybe more relevant messaging within the category. But I think maybe where there's a downfall in how digital and social media are set up is that we don't have control of where our ad is being delivered. So is the context right? Is the consumer still relevant? Is the content alongside our ad still relevant? Because it's one thing to drive effective mass reach, but these variables impact or implicate whether consumers are going to pay attention to your messaging. And I think this is why AI can come in now and really just drive the right messaging to the right user at the right time where it's relevant for them. And exactly what Ryan was saying earlier, let's cast our broad net, because we need to drive mass reach in order for brands to grow and to be relevant. Let's do it consistently, but then let's use the power of AI to do it effectively and to continue those conversations and drive those meaningful connections with our consumers. You mentioned the Great Hack, and there's always controversy in digital, and I think the personal data is not new and not different to controversies we've been facing for a long time. Things like brand safety, fraud in digital is obviously ongoing. Viewability metrics and what people are reporting, is it accurate? Is it true? Is it transparent? And I think with all these things, this is why it is so important that brands and marketers ask the right questions and partner with ethical and compliant partners. Because it's one thing to drive cheap reach, at cheap rates, but this is where you get into the situation where it's fraudulent, people aren't seeing your ads, they're not viewable, and they're not ethical businesses. So going back to the Cambridge Analytica thing, again, it's about making sure you're partnered with partners that are compliant and that are ethical, and asking for those compliance certificates. I think as an industry, we need to move in that direction, whether it's coming from the actual media owners, but also from the actual brands and the marketers themselves.
Michelle, while we're still on you, Marco would like to know, what can small businesses do to boost their brand awareness and lead generation through digital marketing?
Yeah, great question. I think, it's important to understand that people come in and out of the market at different times. So we need to ensure as a brand, whether we're a large brand or a small brand, that we are continuously present, and then using the data and insights to understand where in the funnel is my consumer. So if someone is showing intent for a particular product or a particular service, how I can intersect that with my short-termism play, but then also understanding within my category, what are potential category entry points that I can tap into. So for instance, if you are a life insurance, if someone is showing intent for life insurance, push your life insurance message, Quaker, get it there, push your short-termism strategy. But when people are talking about things like getting married or having a baby or being promoted or starting a job, these are opportunities to drive brand nudges. So they don't have to be at massive scale if budget is obviously a concern, but it's just about ensuring that where possible, I can reach as many of those people as often as possible continuously.
Awesome. Merlin, last two questions to you before I go to the panel for their final thoughts. But do you believe traditional television needs to adapt to new ways to distribute content in order to compete with the likes of Netflix and YouTube and Showmax, for example?
Yeah, definitely. I think somewhat controversially, the concept of television is dead. In terms of sitting and looking at a TV set for video-based entertainment, it's been proven through mobile devices, tablets, PCs, that consumers are mobile and they consume as they move. So the success of Netflix bears testament to that. So if we are assuming that people are going to sit around and wait for something to come up at 8 o'clock on a Monday evening, and that's the only place they're going to get it, we're going to be missing a large number of audiences that are coming in that are digitally inclined. I take my daughter as a case in point, who's 19 years old, consumes no television content. So she doesn't sit in front of the TV to watch television as we do, but she knows everything about what's happening in the movies, the series, the sitcoms. She's consuming it on her mobile device. And she doesn't need a subscription for this. She just needs data, right? Mm-hmm. So if we are assuming that traditional model of delivering content in a chronological order is going to stand the test of time, we're going to be sadly mistaken. We definitely need to look at carving up our content in non-linear manners to allow consumers to access content as they see fit. We have to break up the content, so it can't be a full game. As an example, if I take sports, a lot of people are interested in highlights clips, not just the full game, because they don't have the time, whatever the case may be. But at a later stage, they may want to come back and watch the game, after they've got the results and now they have time. So that model is changing, but I think one of the restrictions for that model, specifically in the SA market, is the regulatory framework that says if you're a broadcaster, you have to have a license, and your license is determined by a frequency, and that's the only place you can broadcast your content. So I think there's a lot of changes that need to come from that perspective. Our consumers are already there. They're waiting for us to get there.
And then Merlin, this question is from Trish to you. Do you believe that a multi-channel strategy for clients is the right way of doing things?
Yes, definitely. I think the failure of a multi-channel strategy is assuming the same execution is going to work equally well across all of the platforms. They've got to be customized. So in terms of, if you take a platform that includes TV, radio, and online, I would see the TV as being the sort of the big execution because it's visual. The radio as support to tune in, to sort of entice you. It's more engaging. It's a conversation. It's more credible. You know, using DJ reads as an example, that kind of thing comes in quite easily there. And on the digital space, it's about little teaser campaigns, things that we can't do on a TV ad in 30 seconds. So it's more interactive, so you can engage, you can change the product color, you can change the product size kind of thing. So when you put all of that together, that becomes the multi-channel campaign, not just taking my 30-second ad, doing a cut down and saying, well, let's put this online and then let's just take the audio and put that onto radio as an example. You've got to understand the ergonomics of each platform individually.
Awesome. And so just in wrapping up, I'd like to go to my panel for their final thoughts. Liv, I'd like to start off with you. What would you like to leave our viewers with this morning?
Thanks, yeah. I think I would like to leave the viewers with changing your perspective on your approach to out-of-home. I think that the rise in digital out-of-home has been enormous. Even during lockdown, we've seen new formats coming to market. Media owners that were going to be rolling out networks have continued to roll out networks, which I think is fantastic. And I think that with digital out-of-home growing so much, the opportunity to be more relevant to your audience, to change your creative messaging, to look at doing dynamic creative, to look at doing programmatic out-of-home, all of these things are not just buzzwords floating around the industry that are happening in other countries. These are things that are possible and are happening in South Africa, and it's such an exciting space.
Eben, final thoughts from you?
I think what we need to understand is that communication is all about trying to reach a specific audience. That audience comes to our platforms for a variety of reasons, but I think the ultimate thing that they come to us for, you can look at inform, educate, entertain, but it all comes down to content, right? So I think the key for anything is align your message with people who produce kick-ass quality and trusted and credible content. And it doesn't really matter where that content lives or whatever the answer on the back end is, but just find people that have credible content that speaks to your audience. And especially if you work with media owners that can give you that in print, digital, television, as Merlin said, just modify it slightly, etc., to make sure that you speak to that audience. But it really comes down to quality of content and just aligning yourself with people who produce that.
I was expecting you to say Kick has profound content.
I'll leave that to JD. He can close with profound.
Isla, what would you like to share as your final thoughts this morning?
I'm going to share 4 final thoughts with you. The first one is I'm just going to remind you of that now Sia's quote. Many people know you, but not many people understand you. Make it your job to understand who you're talking to, in whether you're from a media owner side, a client side, an agency side, wherever you are. With that in mind, remember where multi-channel fits in. So it is all about us mapping their consumer journey and knowing where along that consumer journey you are, purposefully talking to them with the right content. But that being said, make sure everything you do it well. So my third point is really, just because you can do everything as a brand doesn't mean you can necessarily afford to do everything as a brand. So they say it's better to do one thing well than to do 2 things halfway. So make sure that you understand what the role is, but how much you need to do it sufficiently. And lastly, just let 2020 be the lesson to us all forever that flexibility and adaptability should be built into absolutely everything that we do, because you just never know what's waiting for you around the corner.
My goodness, if there was ever a time and a year specifically that was testament to that, it is exactly what you shared, Isla. Thank you for that. JD, what would you like to share? Your final thoughts this morning?
I don't have bullet points, so I wish I kind of went before Isla, but that's okay. I think something to note is amongst all these different channels, of course, each channel has a job to do. It has a purpose and it has a role in the marketing mix. We see that marketers are moving towards reducing the number of platforms that they use to create coherency, to create consistency in the data, and to create actionable insights that they can then use as triggers for their marketing campaigns. So in that sense, the message that I would leave behind is you don't need to staff up significantly to be able to have a multi-channel strategy. Leverage the automation tools that are at your disposal, and I would be My marketing manager would be very disappointed if I didn't say like Everlytic. And then the people, you're not replacing anyone by using automation. You are simply creating additional capacity, and you are creating the opportunity for human beings to do what they do best. Be creative, be strategic, and in having the technology doing the heavy lifting.
Awesome.
And one more time, data.
Pardon, JD?
One more time, data, last shot of the day. There you go.
Michelle, from your perspective, what would you like to leave us with this morning as a final thought?
So I think, you know, Sia, there's been a lot of discussion and the narrative around how much is changing. And I think for me, to leave the audience with the fact that although stuff does change, there are fundamentals that don't change. And we need to just keep bringing that back to when we're looking at our strategies. Are we driving enough reach? Is what we're saying relevant? And are we connecting with as many consumers across as many touch points as possible and as continuously as possible? Because at the end of the day, we are trying to shift the needle, grow our brands, drive sales, and drive those meaningful connections. So how do we amplify what we know works rather than changing, revolutionizing what we think might work?
Great. And Rivik, any last words from you, your final thoughts this morning?
Yes, I think from a radio side, I think we must realize that we can really thrive in this multi-channel environment. We're probably the medium that plays the nicest with everybody else. But I think it's the quality of our product that's going to be the big decider for our future. It has to be innovative. It's got to be different. And I think this big thing around personality, this thing that we're known for, you know, we do own that. We've got to continue to own that. Personality content that's unique and compelling. We've got to keep on delivering that. But I think it's true for all of us. I mean, we've got to work hard to make sure that we create greater advertising demand and help people understand how we fit into this whole matrix, and to continue to do really hard work in that area. Now, our radio salespeople, for example, can't go out there being spot sellers. You know, they've really got to be consummate marketers these days. They've got to understand how all this puzzle fits together and how to get the results that advertisers want. The better we can do that, it's only limited by imaginations, the better things will be for us. But I see a very rosy future for radio.
And wrapping things up, Merlin, for you, what are your last words that you'd like to leave us with this morning?
I think everybody on the panel has said it quite well, so I won't repeat it. But from an SABC perspective, we're one part of the multi-channel environment. We'd like to work with people out there, no matter how crazy the ideas are. We're looking at different ways to engage with audiences, and we'd like to assist you in your campaigns going forward.
Well, that's an open invitation from Merlin's perspective. That's what I'm getting, right, Merlin?
Yes, definitely.
You've opened the gates, the floodgates now. I'm sure a lot of people will be sending you messages, but thank you so much to each of you for sharing your insights this morning. It was fascinating to be part of this conversation. I learned so much from each of you respectively. It really means a lot that you took some time to have this discussion. Thank you to my panelists this morning. Olivia Brown, General Manager at Posterscope, Eben Gevers, Head of Advertising Sales at Arena Holdings, JD Engelbrecht, Managing Director at Everlytic, Isla Prentice, Intelligence Lead at Terasana Consulting within the Media Shop, Michelle Randall, Sales Director at Christopher Africa, Merlin Nike, Group Executive at Television for the SABC, and Rivik Buns, Managing Director at United Stations. And another big thank you goes out to our partners, Vodacom, Easy Ads, Everlytic, Proudly SA, The Media Shop, and Wan Erfra. And lastly, but definitely not least, thank you so much for watching. You took the time, you were patient with us, with our technical hiccups. It really means a lot. And I hope you also took some time to enter our competition. I think you have like the last couple of seconds before this session wraps up in order to enter our competition if you'd like to win that 50,000 rands worth of advertising from Future of Media and Vodacom. Click on that button to enter and get more details. The competition winner will be announced at our next event on the 2nd of September. Until then, thank you once again for watching. Please continue and keep the conversation going. My name is Sia Sangweni, brand manager of cliffcentral.com. Until next time, thank you for being with us this morning.